Hello student, today I am going to discuss you a software lifecycle model that is better than the waterfall model. First of all, the waterfall model has few restrictions as in this model, once you complete with the requirement analysis and you start designing, you cannot add on or modify as per the new upcoming requirements. ये ये जो पॉइंट था आपका वाटरफॉल मॉडल को एक बहुत ही रिस्ट्रिक्टिव बनाता था और वाटरफॉल मॉडल जो आपको काम था उसमें था देयर इज अ प्रॉब्लम कि उसमें द फाइनल क्लाइंट वुड गेट द working model only after end of the 5 steps of waterfall model. The 5 steps of the waterfall model were as shown in this figure. Like this: requirement analysis and specification, design, implementation and unit testing, integration and system testing, operation and maintenance. The model that came after this was the prototype model. In the prototype model, what we have done, we took the subset of the requirement and we created by considering a subset of requirements, actual requirement. We designed a prototype and we put this prototype in front of the customer, which validated. If it is satisfied with the prototype, then we go for another designing considering the few more requirements, and this procedure goes on and number of prototypes are created in this process, which are verified by the, if they are validated by the customer, then only they are enhanced while satisfying further prototypes, further requirements. But this model was very time taking. In the prototype model, this was very time consuming model because once you get a validated prototype, even if it is approved by the client, then it is modified to satisfy few more another set of requirements, subset of requirements, and this process goes on. And when you design a prototype, the coding that you have used in that prototype is not reused. Instead, you need to redesign that software once again. So the prototype model was very time consuming. Okay, and but the advantage was that a prototype was that it used to give a time certain a prototype after regular interval. Because of that, the prototype model was very better in giving you a prototype for validation to the customer. So that was better in analysis, but as the code was used to thrown away, then you need to redesign every time in a new way for every new and design a new prototype. That was very time consuming. Then life cycle model came, which was iterative enhancement model, which used the advantage or the plus points of the prototype model and also used the process of the software model. Like the prototype model, in iterative enhancement model, we get a release, which is the like a prototype or usable product at the end of each cycle. It's much similar to the waterfall model, but with restriction that in after certain time it gives a release which is very much like the product at every step. So you need not to redesign every time. During the first requirement analysis phase, customer and developer specifies as many requirements as possible and prepare a SRS document. because like in prototype model, we took a subset of the requirement, but in this model, we take as many as requirement as possible and create a release one for validation by the customer. The developer implement the specific requirement in one or more cycle of the design, implementation and test based on defined priorities. The aim of the waterfall and prototype model is the delivery of a complete operational and good quality product. In contrast, this model does not deliver an operational quality product at each release, but one that satisfies only a subset of customer requirements. In this, we expect that we are providing only certain functionality at end of one's iteration. Like in prototype model and waterfall model, we give a product which is supposed to satisfy most of the requirement, many of the requirement of the customer. I can show you that in prototype model, is the in prototype model, and now you may get confused at what is the difference. The prototype in the prototype model may be a usable program, but is not suitable as the final software product. The developer used this prototype to refine the requirement and prepare the final specification documents. And because the working prototype has been evaluated by the customer, it is reasonable to expect the resulting specification document will be correct. When the prototype is okay, so working prototype developed as per the current available requirement. It is not created considering all the requirement, but it is designed considering the current requirement. Like I have taken example that suppose you are now building a builder is constructing duplex apartment, then he will focus on to understanding the principles of construction principles of constructing a duplex. He will not focus on constructing a multi-storied building which is of 8 or 10 storied height. But in iterative enhancement model, what we do, we try to focus, satisfy as many as requirement, to satisfy as many as requirement possible at each cycle. In this, in contrast to prototype model, iterative enhancement model does deliver an operational quality product at each release, but one that satisfies only a subset of customer requirement. That's a functional prototype, functional product that satisfies a subset of customer requirement. A typical product will usually have many releases. At each release, customer has an operational quality product that does a portion of what is required. In it, a portion of what is required. It means the first release is satisfying a certain set of portion of requirements, then the another portion of requirement, and like this. The customer is able to do some useful work after the first release. Means when you get a release, suppose there are number of tasks that you expect from the final product, but there suppose you expect 30 to 40 tasks from a software, but in this, after one iteration with first release one, you will be able to do 10 number of tasks, then in next 20 number of tasks, in the third release you will be able to complete 40 numbers of tasks, like this. So when you consider a certain subset of requirement, that requirement is released, that particular portion is an operational product in the sense. Okay. So with this model, first release may be available within the weeks or the month, whereas the customer generally wait for months or year to receive a product using the waterfall and the prototype model. So in this, a user get a working model in a shorter time in comparison to the waterfall model and prototype model. Like I show you in this diagram, take a look of that. Here you may see that in there are three levels. In the first level, the requirements, then design, implementation, and unit testing, integration and system testing in operation, release one. Here you may see that we start with the most of the requirement. Requirement are not added at most. We start with the all of the requirement, and we design for that, and we start with a portion of the software, and once we complete that portion of the software following the sequence of steps, same as in waterfall model, the design, unit testing, system testing, integration and system testing, and operation, we release a software that that satisfy that uh, work, that is an operational software, and that satisfy a portion of requirement of the final product. After that we start designing the second module like this, and after completing the second module following the same step as in waterfall model, we we get another functional portion of the final software. Similarly, this iteration process goes on, and at end of each release, end of each iteration, we get a release which satisfies a portion of the final software. Once we complete with all the portions of the software, we get the final product. Okay, so I can summarize this that in this the waterfall model and prototype model provides you a functional software after a longer time, because in waterfall model that is suitable for small project. If you get a new requirement, you need to follow all the 5 steps each every time for a single updation in a requirement or modification in requirement. Similarly, in prototype model, the problem is that you get a prototype after a certain time. If it is validated by the customer, then okay, you start designing. Otherwise, you it's not validated. You go for uh, you go for repeat and repeating the steps like quick design. In this process, when you quick design for a certain set of requirement, you do not use that code to build the next prototype, and every time you start with a scratch. Because of that, as the number of prototype increases, the number of time to program the code increases. That cause that waterfall model and prototype model to takes longer time in comparison to iterative enhancement model. But in iterative enhancement model, we consider all the requirement at the very start. In contrast, and we in starting, we suppose we start with a portion of a set of subset of requirements, and we start designing, and we implement a portion of the software, and at the end of each iteration we get a software which satisfy one more than the previous iteration level, which are more functionality than the previous release. So this way customer get time to time release through in this way. This model is much better than the waterfall model and prototype model. And here the difference is that all the requirement is considered an initial step, but in the prototype model, if you start with this in this prototype model, what you do uh, what you do is the in this you do not know the all the requirement at the very start, but you refine your requirement with time with each iteration and with each prototype. Once you get aware with all the requirements, then you start following the procedure of the procedure like the waterfall model. So prototype model is used to attain all the requirement that you have to satisfy to build a final software. But in case of iterative enhancement model, you start with analyzing all the requirement elicitation, and after that you compile a portion of the final software in each iteration and to complete the software. So this techniques is used when you can well define or elicitate the requirement for the final software. And if you are not sure about all the requirement, you will prefer to use the prototype model. And for small software project, you will use the waterfall model. So that's all about this iterative enhancement model.